The conflict sharpened when a senior strategist accused him, indirectly, of introducing unnecessary risk. The irony wasn't lost on him. His portfolios were safer than theirs, more balanced, more predictable. But in a world governed by classifications, anything that fell outside the grid was labeled dangerous, regardless of the results. He tried demonstrating the flaw mathematically. He showed how correlations had shifted, how cross-asset behavior no longer matched legacy assumptions, how machine-driven flows had rewritten risk clusters. But the more compelling his data became, the more tightly the room resisted. This wasn't about accuracy. It was about control. If his approach proved valid, the firm would need to rebuild its entire risk framework from the ground up, and that was a change no one wanted to initiate. Tension reached a new level when one of his early reports leaked into a rival firm. He didn't know how it happened. A misplaced email, a forwarded attachment, a quiet act of internal sabotage. But once the rival firm saw the numbers, their analysts immediately understood the implications. They didn't question the classification. They questioned why they hadn't discovered it first. Within days, the rival firm launched a silent inquiry into market structure. Their researchers traced the same fractures he had found. Their algorithm confirmed the outdated clusters. Their models aligned with the new framework he had stumbled into. And suddenly, his small deviation was no longer an isolated experiment. It was a competitive threat. Pressure inside his own firm intensified. Executives realized that if the rival firm acted on this insight first, they would gain an advantage across multiple strategies. But instead of embracing the discovery, they aimed to contain it. Meetings turned into directives. Directives turned into warnings. He was told to unwind the deviation and return to the standard model for alignment and compliance. He walked out of the room, knowing that if he complied, the truth would disappear back into silence. But everything changed when the market experienced a sudden volatility spike. The old classification framework failed instantly. Portfolios built on it suffered sharp, unexpected losses. Correlations snapped in ways the firm couldn't explain. But his portfolio, quiet, unassuming, built on a deviation no one approved, held steady. No chaos, no shock, no surprise. That moment broke the illusion. Analysts rushed to compare performance. Strategists demanded explanations. Senior leaders, rattled by the failures of their trusted models, looked at his deviation with new eyes. The build-up reached its peak when a director confronted him privately, not with threats, but with fear disguised as curiosity. "How long," she asked, "has the system been this wrong?" And he realized the question wasn't about his method. It was about the future the industry had been unknowingly avoiding. The firm was standing at the edge of an uncomfortable truth, and he knew exactly what would happen if he took the final step and forced them to face it. The director's question hung in the air, heavier than either of them expected. How long had the system been wrong? He'd spent weeks mapping the answer. Years, he realized, years of markets evolving while institutions clung to classifications designed for a different era. Years of subtle mispricings, invisible distortions, and misread risk signals shaping decisions that affected billions. Years of complacency hidden behind best practices. And now the failure was undeniable. He knew this was a moment to reveal everything, or watch the truth slip back into silence. So he laid it out plainly. The outdated framework didn't just distort risk. It reshaped portfolios, redirected capital, and reinforced decisions that no longer matched market reality. His deviation wasn't clever. It was natural. It aligned with a world the old system refused to see. The director listened, expression shifting from skepticism to realization to something closer to fear. If he was right, the firm wasn't just behind. It was blind. And the industry, still worshiping the same assumptions, was marching confidently into avoidable risks. The climax came when leadership convened an emergency session, not to reprimand him, not to contain the idea, but to understand it. Analysts filled the room with data. Engineers pulled live correlation maps. Strategists replayed the volatility spike with newly calibrated models. Every layer of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The small deviation wasn't an outlier. It was a key to a framework that actually matched the modern market. Silence spread across the room as the old foundation finally cracked. The firm didn't just adjust, they pivoted. A full structural overhaul began. They tested the new classification across historical regimes. It held. They applied it to simulations of past crises. It outperformed. They deployed it in limited portfolios. It adapted instantly. What started as a forbidden deviation became the blueprint for a new risk model, one that reflected reality instead of tradition. But the consequences rippled outward. Rival firms noticed a sudden shift in performance. Researchers detected changes in market behavior. Analysts speculated that someone, somewhere, had discovered a new way of seeing the system. The truth spread, not through announcements, but through outcomes. Returns stabilized. Volatility softened. Patterns sharpened. And slowly, the industry began to follow. Not because they understood the idea, not because they trusted it, but because ignoring it meant staying blind. The resolution arrived in a quiet moment weeks later. The portfolio manager sat alone, watching the new system he'd accidentally uncovered reshape the firm's entire approach. He hadn't set out to change anything. He hadn't tried to challenge the industry. His journey began with a small choice, a simple question asked at the right time. But sometimes that's all transformation needs. Because financial systems don't fail from chaos alone. They fail from rigidity, from assumptions that outlive their usefulness, from models that stop reflecting the world they're meant to understand. He had shown that the future isn't built by grand revolutions. It's built by noticing when the present no longer fits the past. So, what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The moment a simple choice sparked a new era. It began with a decision so ordinary that no one noticed it. A choice made in a quiet office by someone with no grand plan, no intention of changing anything. Yet that single decision, subtle, almost accidental, set off a chain reaction that transformed an entire segment of global finance. To understand how, we need to return to a moment defined by stagnation. Markets moved predictably. Institutions repeated the same playbook. Innovation felt slow, almost ceremonial. Everyone believed the future would mirror the past because the past had never truly been challenged. Stability looked permanent, until the simplest choice pierced the illusion. This story matters now because transformative change doesn't always announce itself. It can begin with a quiet shift, a small deviation from routine. And when systems grow rigid, even small choices can break open entirely new directions. The first reveal begins with the person who made the decision, a mid-level portfolio manager known for caution, not boldness. He followed rules, trusted models, and avoided risks that couldn't be quantified. But one morning, while reviewing performance data, he noticed something that unsettled him. A consistent underperformance tied not to assets themselves, but to the assumption behind how they were grouped. The second reveal unfolded when he questioned that assumption. It was a framework the industry treated as untouchable, an old classification method used for decades. Changing it wasn't forbidden. It was simply unthinkable. Yet the data suggested the framework no longer reflected reality. And for the first time in his career, he considered ignoring the rule instead of obeying it. The third reveal came when he acted. Quietly, privately, he rebalanced his portfolio, using an approach that contradicted every model he had been trained to trust. He didn't expect much. He didn't even plan to track it closely. But as days passed, something remarkable happened. Volatility dropped. Returns stabilized. Correlations shifted in ways no one predicted. The small choice wasn't just working. It was outperforming. He didn't know it yet. But that simple deviation had exposed the first crack in a system that had gone unquestioned for far too long. At first, the manager assumed it was luck, a coincidence, a brief moment where the market aligned in his favor. But as weeks passed, the pattern held. The new structure he'd quietly created behaved with consistency that defied the old models. Drawdown softened. Cross-asset volatility balanced itself. Even during turbulent sessions, his portfolio moved with an unusual calm. The conflict began when his internal reports drew attention. A colleague noticed the abnormal stability and asked questions he wasn't ready to answer. Another asked for his allocation notes. A third wondered why his risk exposure no longer matched the firm's standard framework. He downplayed everything, framing the results as temporary noise. But the attention grew, and so did the pressure. The tension sharpened when the firm's risk department flagged discrepancies. His positions didn't fit the internal categories used to measure exposure. The models couldn't classify what he'd built. To them, it looked like an error, a potential oversight, something that needed correction. They issued a formal request, realign the portfolio with approved guidelines. He hesitated. Realigning meant undoing the very structure that was outperforming. But resisting meant attracting scrutiny. And scrutiny, in a system allergic to deviation, could end his career. Still, the data was undeniable. His small choice wasn't just working. It was revealing a flaw in the industry's foundational assumptions. As he dug deeper, he discovered something startling. The old classification method had been built during an era when market dynamics were simpler, an era long gone. New technologies, new global linkages, and new trading behaviors had reshaped correlations in ways the framework no longer captured. The system wasn't broken. It was outdated. The deeper he tested, the clearer it became. The industry wasn't mispricing assets. It was miscategorizing them. And his deviation had accidentally stumbled into a more accurate structure, one aligned with how modern markets truly functioned. But the conflict escalated when higher-ups reviewed his results. Some praised the performance, but most focused on the deviation. They questioned his methods, his compliance, his judgment. They warned that even beneficial results must follow established rules. Stability, they said, comes from consistency, not improvisation. Yet he knew the truth. Stability was an illusion created by guidelines the market had long outgrown. And the more he analyzed, the more certain he became that the industry's foundation would eventually crack under the weight of outdated assumptions. His quiet choice had revealed a future the firm wasn't ready to accept. And now he had to decide whether to retreat into conformity or push forward and face the consequences. Because the moment he chose to keep going, the ripple he started would begin scaling into a wave. Pressure tightened around him as senior management grew increasingly uneasy. Meetings were scheduled. Questions grew sharper. Analysts were assigned to review his methods, a polite way of saying they were looking for a mistake. But the deeper they dug, the less sense the old framework made. His deviation wasn't reckless. It was logical. It matched the market far more accurately than the firm's official model. Yet acknowledging that truth meant admitting the system itself was outdated. Inside those meetings, he felt the shift. The tone changed from curiosity to suspicion. When he explained his reasoning, executives pushed back with phrases like industry standard, best practice, and historical reliability. But those words rang hollow. Standards built for past decades no longer mapped onto the present. Best practices assumed a world that no longer existed. And historical reliability was a relic when modern markets evolved at a pace history had never seen.